As above, so below. It's one of the oldest sentences we've ever whispered, and somehow, everyone whispered it alone. This film follows that sentence across the world. Shamans on the steppes of Central Asia, Buddhists in India, the mystics of Islam, the Kabbalists of Judaism, then holds their oldest claim against something science only just discovered. None of them read each other's words. All of them found the same one. Let's begin. Somewhere in antiquity, a hand carved 7 words into stone. Words that would outlive empires, outlive languages, outlive the very civilization that wrote them. As above, so below. Nobody agreed on what it meant. Nobody still does. But nobody could stop repeating it. Look at your own hand for a moment. Notice how the veins branch beneath your skin. Thick lines splitting into thinner ones splitting again until they vanish into capillaries too fine to see. Now hold that image. We'll come back to it, because before this is over, I'm going to show you that same branching in places you would never expect to find it. A river doesn't know it's being watched. Neither does a bolt of lightning or a tree deciding where to grow its next branch. And yet each one, independently, arrives at the same architecture. A main line, splitting again, hunting for the most efficient way to spread across a surface. Nature keeps drawing the same picture. It just keeps changing the medium. Open your chest, hypothetically, and you'd find the same design at work. Your lungs don't fill with air through a single wide tube. They fill through a branching structure that divides again and again, reaching nearly 300 million tiny sacs, each one close enough to a blood vessel to trade oxygen for carbon dioxide in an instant. Your circulatory system does the same thing in reverse. One artery becoming thousands of capillaries, then gathering itself back into a handful of veins. You are not built from straight lines. You are built from branching ones. Zoom further in and the pattern doesn't stop. A single neuron in your brain reaches outward with dozens of thin extensions, searching for other cells to connect with. Multiply that by roughly 86 billion, and you get the object generating the thought you're having right now. Your brain isn't a processor. It's a forest that learned to think. In 2020, a small team of researchers ran an experiment nobody expected to matter this much. They took a map of the universe's large-scale structure, the filaments of galaxies stretching across billions of light years, and a map of the neural network inside a human brain. Then they measured them mathematically, side by side. The two networks distributed their mass in strikingly similar ways. The clustering, the density, the ratio of connected nodes to empty space, numbers that had no business lining up, lined up. Nobody is claiming your brain is a tiny universe or that the cosmos is somehow thinking. That would be a beautiful sentence and an irresponsible one. What the study actually suggests is stranger and more restrained. Whatever process builds efficient networks, whether out of galaxies or neurons, tends to build them the same way. A coastline, a drought-cracked field, a vegetable in a kitchen, a snowflake melting on a sleeve. None of these consulted each other. None of them read the same textbook. And still, they all keep returning to the identical logic. Break the whole into smaller versions of itself and keep breaking until the shape repeats at every scale you're willing to look. So far, we've only described what happens. Now here's the harder question. Why does an unrelated river, a nerve cell, and the largest structure in existence all converge on the same blueprint? The answer isn't mysticism, it's physics, but a kind of physics that behaves almost like philosophy. Physicists have a name for one of the simplest rules that produces this shape: diffusion-limited aggregation. The idea is almost embarrassingly simple. Particles wander at random. When they bump into something already fixed in place, they stick. Repeat that a few million times, and you don't get a smooth mass. You get a branching structure every time, regardless of what the particles are. Electricity finds the path of least resistance through the air and draws a lightning bolt. Water finds the path of least resistance through soil and draws a river delta. Blood finds the path of least resistance through tissue and draws a circulatory system. Gravity, over billions of years, finds the path of least resistance through the fabric of space and draws a cosmic web. Different forces, different materials, different timescales, separated by billions of years. But the underlying instruction is identical. Don't waste effort. Follow whatever route costs the least, and let the shape fall out of that economy. Here is what makes this stranger than a single myth from a single culture. On the steppes of Central Asia, the old Turkic peoples pictured existence as three stacked worlds: sky above, earth in the middle, and underworld beneath. Held together by a single world tree, its roots reaching into what lies below, its branches reaching into what lies above. The tree wasn't decoration. It was the axis the whole cosmos turned on, and a shaman's task was to climb it. In India, the Upanishads declared that the individual self and the ultimate reality of the cosmos were never two separate things to begin with. Tat Tvam Asi. Thou art that. In the Buddhist sutras, a different image altogether. An infinite net stretching in every direction, a jewel tied at every knot, and in the polished face of each jewel, the reflection of all the others. The whole contained in every part, endlessly. In the Jewish tradition, long before its mystics went looking for cosmic diagrams, its rabbis had already made the same claim in plainer language. Save one life, and Jewish teaching holds that you have saved an entire world. A single person weighted with the value of everything that exists. Centuries later, the Kabbalists took that intuition further still, describing a primordial human form whose body corresponded point for point to the entire architecture of creation. In medieval Europe, the visionary Hildegard of Bingen drew the human body enclosed inside a cosmic circle and called it what it was: a small world, mirroring the Great One. Not folk superstition, church-sanctioned theology, illustrated by her own hand. In the Quran, the claim is made with almost clinical directness. Signs for those who seek certainty are written on the horizon and within yourselves. Do you not see them? The outer sky and the inner self, named in the same breath, as if neither made sense without the other. Islamic mysticism carried the idea further. Ibn Arabi gave it a name: Al-Insan al-Kamil, the universal human. A single person who, if fully realized, would mirror the whole of existence within themselves. And in China, a philosopher writing the Tao Te Ching proposed a quiet chain of resemblance. The human being follows the pattern of the earth follows the pattern of the heavens follow the pattern of the way itself. Steppe shamans, Indian sages, Buddhist monks, Talmudic rabbis, Jewish mystics, a Christian abbess, Quranic scripture, Sufi philosophers, a Taoist sage. None of them read each other's texts. Separated by oceans, centuries, and languages that shared no common root, They kept independently arriving at the same suspicion, that the self and the cosmos are not two different scales of two different things, but one shape, examined from two different distances.
I want to be careful with what I just showed you. This isn't evidence that any of these traditions were literally describing diffusion-limited aggregation, or that a Kabbalist in medieval Spain somehow intuited a mathematics he had no access to. That would be an overstatement dressed up as a discovery. What it does suggest is something more modest and, honestly, more interesting. Wherever humans have looked closely at themselves and then looked up, across every era and every unconnected culture, they've kept noticing the same relationship, long before anyone could explain why it might be physically true. Call it convergent intuition. Enough independent minds arriving at the same suspicion is, at minimum, worth taking seriously. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to overreach. Humans are extraordinary pattern finders, sometimes to a fault. We see faces in clouds and meaning in coincidence. It's fair to ask whether this entire idea is just a more sophisticated version of that same habit, taking a handful of genuinely similar shapes and deciding they must mean something profound. I don't think that fully explains it away. The mathematics behind these networks holds up under scrutiny. The resemblance isn't just visual, it's structural, measurable, repeatable. But I'd rather admit the uncertainty than oversell the mystery. Something real is happening here. I just don't think anyone, including me, fully understands its edges yet. Remember your hand. That branching beneath your skin isn't only functional. It's a signature. The same signature written by rivers, by lightning, by the galaxies strung across the dark. You've been carrying the universe's handwriting since before you were born, embedded in the very tissue that lets you hold a cup, turn a page, reach for someone else's hand. We tend to look at the night sky and feel small, and there's truth in that feeling. The distances are real. The scale is not an exaggeration. But smallness isn't the only honest response. You could just as easily look up and recognize your own architecture staring back at you, not metaphorically, but structurally. The same branching logic that scattered galaxies across the dark also built the lungs drawing breath in your chest right now. You're not a visitor standing outside the pattern, admiring it from a distance. You're an instance of it. So here's what I'll leave you with. Not an answer, because I don't have one worth pretending to own. If the same shape keeps appearing at every scale reality offers, is it because the universe is built from one idea, endlessly repeated? Or because that shape was never really the universe's to withhold from us in the first place?